Hello, and welcome to Empowering Through Employment, Fostering Competency, Changing Perceptions, and Enhancing Community Belonging for Individuals with Disabilities at the 2024 CU Boulder Disability Symposium. My name is David Braz, and I have the pleasure of introducing Brian Dean and Vicky Ortiz for today's session. I'm a white male, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with black hair and a black beard, though my hair is gray. I have green eyes, and I'm wearing a light green short sleeve shirt and khaki pants. The University of Colorado Boulder is hosting the Disability Symposium to acknowledge that more work must be done to improve the inclusion of persons with disabilities on the Boulder campus. Efforts to improve inclusion must focus on students, staff, and faculty. The 2021 CU Boulder Campus Climate Survey Report, which was released in April of 2022, found that 44% of undergraduate students and 47% of graduate students reported experiencing incivility in the prior 12 months. For students with disabilities, these numbers climbed to 54% and 62% respectively. The symposium is a springboard to continue campus-wide conversations on how each of us can improve inclusion on campus and improve support for all persons with disabilities. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty in their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, and consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. I now turn our presentation over to Brian and Vicky.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Good morning. Well, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is. Welcome. As David said, my name is Brian Dean, and I will formally introduce myself here in a second. I apologize. The better presenter, my teammate Vicky Ortiz, wasn't able to join us, so you all will be stuck here with me. But I promise we'll have a lot of fun. We'll share some information, some thoughts. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat. Feel free to unmute. It's okay to interrupt me. And I'll try to find a good pace to move forward so we can get through within the hour and I don't take any more additional of your time. I'll do a couple of activities. So once we get there, I'll explain and discuss those and make sure everyone has access to them. And it's good to be here. I see a couple familiar names. I promise I won't give you too much of a hard time, Robin, as well as Kristen. As David said, hopefully that's the right screen. As David said, my name is Brian Dean, and this session's we're really going to talk about employment, these concepts of how do we foster employment, how do we change and enhance perceptions of members in the community when we talk about employment. What does that mean? And how there's an intersection between employment across a variety of different areas for all people within their life, regardless if they have a disability or not. So as David mentioned, my name's Brian. I have a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from the University of Northern Colorado. So gotta get a Go Bears shout out there. And I'm also a certified rehabilitation counselor. A lot of my work in there focuses on not only employment, it's a big priority or a big focus area, but it's really access to the community, all those things that we all access within our daily life with or without disabilities. And specifically for people with disabilities, how do we increase that access and how do we support them with their goals and moving forward and experiencing the same things that anyone does within the community as well. My title has things called customized and supported employment. Won't talk about those today, but those are both models that we utilize to support individuals with accessing and pursuing employment of their choice. In my other work time, I do work with our Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, or LEND, training program at the University of Colorado at the School of Medicine located at the Anschutz Medical Campus with my colleague Robin Ennis, who's here as well. I'm with the Colorado Office of Employment First, and just our shameless plug here, we are part of JFK Partners at the School of Medicine in the section of developmental and behavioral pediatrics at the school. We are part of the University Center in Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, or the UCED. We do a lot of collaboration, partnering, training, technical assistance, as well as mentoring for organizations in the community, for employers, for individuals with disabilities, their families, their caregivers, and anyone who might be in a supportive role in working with those individuals directly, providing a direct service. Our vision, and where we're going to tie this all in as we move throughout today, is a culture of, again, that inclusive, meaningful, and competitive employment for all people. Don't worry, I'll define and we'll talk about what competitive employment means, because we use that term for a purpose. Our mission, again, is leading Colorado towards that equitable employment, reaching all people with disabilities. And we do that through collaboration, having meaningful conversations and discussions, looking at systems, the systems that are in place, where are they working, more specifically, where are they not working, or where are those barriers that people are running into. Then we look at training, and we use the term training, but I like to use it. How do we build that knowledge, and how do we build the understanding for people within the community as a whole? So our topics for today, where I want to start is really foundational, because I think it's super important. Once we have that foundation, it can really allow us to build up the information that we'll talk about and have you all think about where are those connections or intersections within your work or your roles, whatever those may be, and getting you to start to think about what does that look like and where do you fall within some of these components. So we'll talk about disability, we'll talk about intersectionality, inclusion, and employment. Once we set that foundation, we'll move forward, and where do these all intersect? And specifically, we're going to look at intersections around employment, quality of life, and inclusion through this lens of disability specifically. So this is where I'm going to try my best, so bear with me. Either using your computer, your phone or tablet or whatever extra piece of technology, I want you to open a web browser or a new tab if you're using a computer, and we're going to do a Mentimeter activity. So what I'll have you all do is, give me 1 second. I want you to go to www.menti, M-E-N-T-I, meter, METER.com. And once you are all on mentimeter.com, and hopefully you can see this, the instructions should be on their screen. If they're not, let me know. Okay. So www.menti.com. I'm sorry, I told you the wrong one. Menti.com. Once you're there, I want you to enter the access code. And the access code is 1571. Thank you, Patricia. 6496. So Patricia's helping me out. Thank you. That information is in the chat box. And is everyone there? Were we able to get there? Once you're there, once you're logged on to menti.com and you use the code, I want you to answer these questions. with what you're comfortable with, and you all are fast and on top and are good to go. How old were you when you got your first job? So I see 13, 15, 16, 10. Wow. And when we think about
What?
work and we think about jobs, right? This could be helping out a parent or a family
Oh,
member,
let me log out of my laptop.
anything like that. Maybe it's a formal job, maybe it was a chore where you got paid for. Now, you don't need to share, but I want you to reflect on what's your current age now, right? How old are you now? And looking back at how many years has it been since you started working or had that first job? 39. Okay, great. Yeah. So when we think about this, and we'll transition into the next one here next, we have a variety of ages, right? And when we think about work, we all start work at different points, different times, and for a lot of different reasons. You think about the reason why you started working. When I ask people this question, it's usually, so I was told once I was 18, if I didn't have a job, then I would need to figure out what my life looks like, whether that's housing, whether that's find something to do. Maybe it was money, maybe it was to buy a car, maybe it was to build relationships or friendships. Maybe it was for another reason that was important, where work was going to give you access to your community or other benefits such as health or a paycheck. And we'll talk all about it. Okay. Look at this. I do a fun activity where you can still leave your cameras off. Thanks, everyone. My next question might take a little bit longer time. What was your first job? So we have age when you first started working, whatever that looks like for you. What was it? Childcare, PRA, someone can explain that. Wow, they're coming in. Staff agency mostly. Okay, babysitting, babysitter, lots common. Barista. McDonald's, Dairy Queen, computer repair, nice. Movie theaters, retail. We have Dairy Queen, corner store, like gas station or retail, clerk at a jewelry store, another movie theater. Does anyone lawn care? Does anyone notice any themes around this? And you can put them in the chat too, or shout out. Some of the themes that we start to see, right? Retail, food service, service industries. Yeah, David. Yeah, low skilled or entry level, right? Minimum wage. Okay. Ooh, we'll talk about minimum wage. Yeah, musician. Good. Warehouse assistant as well, paper delivery. Okay. As we move forward, I want you to, best you can, remember some of these different jobs that we have. Because when we talk about employment, oftentimes what we see is people with disabilities, regardless of age, regardless of skills, regardless of their interests or desires, we start to see these are the types of jobs people are being told they should do, or the type of work that's available to them. And once we get to the end, I'm going to challenge you based on your role or where you're at to think about some of these positions a little differently. Not everyone wants to do babysitting or works at, I mean, I might work at Dairy Queen, ice cream's awesome, but not everyone wants to work in a fast food restaurant. And what we sometimes see, these are your job here, pick from your fast food places or pick from your retail places as well. Thanks, everyone. All right, so I'm going to switch us back here, and I just wanted to set the stage with that, just to get us thinking when we talk about work, what are some of those different things as well? Okay. And David, is this back up on the main title screen now?
Yes, it's coming through.
So to start us off with our foundation, let's talk about disability, intersectionality, inclusion, and employment. There's a lot of different definitions when it comes to disability. So I wanted to look at two different ones, or a few different ones on two different slides here. So this first one, defining disability, talking about the dictionary definition. A physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions or participate in typical daily life activities or interactions. The second definition here from the Center for Disease Control, or CDC, what is a disability? Question mark. A disability is any condition of the body or mind impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities or activity limitation and interact with the world around them, or also known as participation restrictions. When we look or listen to these two different definitions, one thing we want to be aware of and acknowledge or have understanding of is that disability means a lot of different things to different people. Everyone's an individual. We all have our unique individuality characteristics, traits, what things mean to us. And when we listen and look at these two different models or definitions, both are coming from that medical definition or that medical lens or that medical perspective. The things that we don't see in these definitions, for example, are things around culture or what that personal experience might look like for an individual. So shifting from that medical lens or that medical perspective, defining disability based on what people say or individuals who identify as having a disability. This first one is from Amani Babarin, who's a writer and activist. Disability is a holistic experience, so it must have a holistic definition. Disability is not just a physical diagnosis, but a lived experience in which parameters and barriers are placed upon our lives because of that diagnosis. And we'll start to dive in and we'll start to see what this can look like for people. The next definition from Lawrence Carter Long, who's an author, artist, and disability media enthusiast, is this. Once upon a time, disability was just a diagnosis. Thankfully, through time, the notion has evolved to embrace broader concepts like constituency, identity, and culture. And then the final definition on this slide from Emily Ladau, who's a disability rights activist, author, and speaker, is disability, a state of being, a natural part of the human experience. So when we look at these different definitions of disability, we have a medical perspective that's focused on limitations, access, barriers. But then we take a shift on the other side of that holistic experience, that human experience, and that it's one aspect of the whole person. And that's something we'll talk about a lot, and we want to be aware and mindful and seek to understand is the experience of that whole person and what has that looked like for them. So to transition into intersectionality and identities. Here on the screen, there's a photo or a diagram. And in the center, there's a circle of a person. And then we have 7 arrows going out from each of those. And at the end of each arrow, we have ethnicity, gender, age, sexuality, disability, and dis is in parentheses, and then ability, culture, class, and religion. Intersectionality is a way of understanding and analyzing the complexity of the world and in people and in human experiences, along with the events and the conditions of social and political life, And the self can seldom be understood as shaped by one factor. There's not one thing that impacts. It's a combination. And it's generally shaped by many factors and diverse and mutually influencing ways as well. Think about yourself. Think about in each of these areas of ethnicity, gender, age, sexuality, disability, culture, class, religion. How has that influenced you? Or identities that you may identify or connect with? Being a parent, being a student, being an athlete, being a musician, and all the other ones that the non-exhaustive list that I'm not getting to. But there's a lot of different things that can have an influence. Oftentimes when we talk about intersectionality and identities, it's looking at that social inequality perspective and people's lives in the organization of power, right, in a given society are better understood as being shaped, again, not by a single axis of social division, be it race, gender, or class, but many of those accesses and how they work together or interact with one another to influence each other. Intersectionality is an analytic tool, and it gives people better access to the complexity of the world and of themselves. So again, intersectionality describes how different aspects of people's identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. These can include, but aren't limited to, again, each of these that I've mentioned: ethnicity, gender, age, sexuality, disability, culture, class, and religion. This is important because, again, it provides that more comprehensive understanding and look into inequality and how people can experience discrimination in multiple and or overlapping ways as well. So I mentioned this just now, but I want to review it again. When we define disability intersectionality specifically, again, providing that framework or prism for understanding the complexities and cumulative way in which the effect of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, classism, combine, overlap, and intersect to create those unique barriers and lived experiences for people with multiple marginalized identities. And intersectionality acknowledges that systems of oppression are complex and best understood when considering the historical context and the present day relationship between those identities, societal norms, or systems. And that we can't just think about these systems in isolation. There's a lot of influencers, and it's not an isolated thing. And people with disabilities, just like all people, right, but probably more, experience trauma. They experience ableism, discrimination, and mistreatment in the context of multiple cultural identities, including race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and age. So continuing to build our foundation from intersectionality, let's talk about inclusion. So when we define inclusion, just as inclusion, right, the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. The second part of inclusion and disability inclusion, right, including people with disabilities in everyday activities and roles. And this comes from the Center for Disease Control. One thing I encourage and tell people to think about is we can be inclusive, but does that include disability? Does that include disability inclusion as part of that as well? And if we think about it a step further, here on the next slide, inclusion versus belonging. And disability, when we look at inclusion through the lens of and the perspective of disability, how do we understand the relationships between how people function and interact within their communities? Again, looking at this intersection around inclusion and disability, and what are those experiences for people? Is it, yeah, we're just including you, or do we hit that deeper dive, that deeper level of inclusion, getting more to that sense of belonging? We think about the iceberg analogy, And this analogy is used a variety of different ways. But if there's an iceberg in the ocean and we only see the tip of it, right? Is the tip the inclusion? But we need to take that deeper dive and get down to the base to have more of that sense of belonging. And disability inclusion is focused on ensuring that people are exposed to those patterns and experiences and expectations of everyday life, and that they have the right to experience that. And people experience what's labeled in air quotations here, the good things in life, if they hold those valued social roles within their communities. And when we think about valued social roles, this could be things like being a student, being a worker or an employee, being a member of their community and a contributing member within their community, a patient, a partner, a parent, a neighbor, and then an employee as well. So we're going to transition here into the employment side. And you may or may not be familiar with these statistics, but I want to share them and I'll explain them in detail. Based on the national core indicators, we know that 85%, not a typo, 85% of people with a significant disability are either unemployed, they're not working, or they're underemployed. They're not working as much as they want to, or that they're interested or able in doing so. Okay? That's a huge number, right? 85% is a lot of people. When we break down the indicators in a little greater detail, 44% of people who are not working want a job in their community. So just about half of that 85%, 44% want to work. Now, the most staggering statistic here is that out of those 44% who are interested in work, only 29% of those have this as a documented goal. Now, this is coming from a perspective of people who are receiving services, whether that's through a Medicaid waiver, through our state Medicaid agencies, an individualized education plan or IEP, if they're in high school, or anywhere where they have a service plan where they have their goals listed of what they want to do and what they've expressed. Only 29% out of those 44 have a goal listed as a service of something that they're interested in receiving support to obtain that goal. Pretty shocking, right? Pretty low. As we move, we'll talk about why it's so important to increase this percentage and ways that we can do this. The Individual Placement and Support, or IPS, Employment Center, is an employment center out of Columbia University that used to be out of Dartmouth. Individual Placement and Support is an evidence-based model for providing employment services to individuals with significant mental health or behavioral health diagnosis, including substance use. What they have found is that 65% of individuals with significant mental illness want to work, but only 2% have access to an evidence-based supported employment program. So supported employment is a method of providing employment services to help that person find, get, and keep a job. Once they're working, they have access to the supports to ensure that they maintain their job, continue to advance, and do well within their work as well. Kind of shocking, right? So let's look at Colorado, since we're in this great and awesome state. So this is a diagram, and I'll explain this chart and what it's looking at here. So for Colorado, this diagram shows the percentage of working age population who was employed in 2019. So don't throw anything at me or be like, well, that's kind of old. The data is old, and we should have new data here soon. But what this is looking at is the column on the left that's black is saying that 76% of people with no disabilities are employed. So throughout the United States, 76% of people without a disability are working. Here in Colorado, in the gray shaded area, we're at 80%. So we're above the national average when it comes to people without a diagnosed disability or disclosed disability are working. Now, if we look in the middle column here, the bar that's black in color shows that 38% of people in the US with any disability are employed. Okay. Here in Colorado, we're at 46%. So again, we're a little higher in the national average, but almost half of what compared to people without disabilities. And then on the far right, we have 30% of people in the US with a cognitive or intellectual or developmental disability who are employed, and 39% here in Colorado. Again, when we compare Colorado to the US in this category, slightly above the percentage, but when we compare that to people who don't fall within that cognitive or developmental disability population or any disability as a whole, we're very low. And there's, again, another significant gap between people who are employed with a disability and versus people who are employed without a disability as well. Okay. So I have another question for you all, because I like questions, and it gives me an idea of where you're at. Did we know, what do we think? Why would I have a slide that says, is all employment the same? That seemed like a weird slide. Isn't all employment the same? Doesn't everyone, isn't work, or do we think it's different? Or did we know that it's different? I'll give you a little hint there. Some of you said minimum wage earlier, Amanda and Anne Marie, so that was a good segue. And you can share, like, yeah, I knew it was different, or no, I thought employment was employment. When we talk about employment, it's not the same. And it hasn't, historically, it hasn't been the same for people with disabilities. People with disabilities have been only offered segregated employment models. And here on the screen, there's a diagram of a circle in the center that says segregated employment models. And then on each corner or on each side, the different segregated employment models. So we have adult activity centers, work activity centers, day programs, and sheltered workshops. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with these different employment models, these were designed specifically for people with disabilities. Oh, you have a disability, based on what that looks like for you and your experiences, your air quotes, you're too disabled to work. You can't work because of your diagnosis, your medical conditions, your experience, you don't have any skills. But hey, we have these different things where you can go do work-like activities. You can go to day program. They're lots of fun. They're social. We go bowling. Maybe we'll go do some lawn work, some manual labor, do some projects. Or you can work in a sheltered workshop where we might pay you minimum wage. And historically here in Colorado, you might get paid below minimum wage. You might get paid $5 an hour or $3 an hour. Luckily, here in Colorado, we are a front runner in many senses where we no longer offer, no one with a disability can earn below minimum wage. The Federal Labor and Standards Act, the 14C certificates that allow businesses to pay people with disabilities below minimum wage, we have completely faded those out here in Colorado. And we have a House bill that says an employer can no longer pay a person with a disability below minimum wage. Now, if I pick on the Midwest, there's other states in the nation who still operate these certificates where people earn 50 cents an hour for some of the work that they do. And I'm going to mispronounce your name, Oysen. I'm sorry. We segregate employment by ability of education, allowing those with more education to have higher paying jobs. We force people unable to go through schooling to be subjected to lower wages that tend to have higher quantities of manual labor, customer services. We also segregate based on preconceived notions of the difficulty, of the jobs which are not scaled reasonably. The quotes, difficult jobs tend to be thought of those that are mentally taxing, such as rocket scientist, brain surgeon. While those are easy, are paid less, but tend to be physically taxing, such as construction. Yeah, great. And that's a great comment. What I alluded to earlier when I said, well, what was your first job? Oftentimes for people with disabilities, their option, well, I call it the 4 F's, right? Food, filth, feces, or flowers. Go work at the flower shop. Go do janitorial work. Go clean up animal poop. Go work at the fast food places, versus understanding and leading us into this next topic of employment first of what are those skills and what are those interest areas? Because we all have skills to contribute. And employment first is a belief, and it's much more of a buzzword where within this unwavering belief that it's that all people have valuable contributions to offer to the workforce, regardless of the type of their disability, the significance, the experiences, and they have a right to pursue their employment goals. This means that everyone can work, and work is for everyone. There's no exclusions there. And this is where that system shift and that knowledge shift or enhancing those perceptions is really takes place. It's that first and preferred outcome, right? Instead of saying if you're a student or in high school or college or wherever, or at a day program, instead of saying, well, here's your options, you can go to a day program, you can get this service or this, making sure, hey, what about work? Have you thought about it? Have you not? Are you interested? If you've never thought about working at minimum wage or higher, that offers those opportunities for advancement. You can apply for a promotion just like anyone, and you're not told no just because you have a disability or perceived to have a disability, especially if it's a disability that's visible or that's not visible. It's a systems change within agencies, organizations, universities, even funding, the policies, and really getting that culture shift to alleviate a lot of the fears, myths, and misconceptions about employing people with disabilities. And how do we equip employers to build a meaningful, diverse, and supportive workforce beyond simply saying, well, we're diverse because we hire people or we ask on our applications if people have a disability. Are they there working? Are they promoting? Is what's being advertised on being inclusive and culture, what does that look like behind the scenes for those employees and for those workers? Another term that's really important foundationally is this term competitive and integrated employment. What this means is that individuals with disabilities, just like all people, are working in positions where they're paid at minimum wage or higher, which here in Colorado, we know they have to be. There's no longer there's no employers offering below minimum wage. Those opportunities to advance, and when they're integrated within the workplace, they work alongside other people with and without disabilities. When we talk about integration, it's people having the same position title as other people with and without disabilities. Historically, prior to 2014, it could have been, yeah, we have our group of people. They're all people with disabilities who are food servers, and they interact with customers. That's not integrated. We're really looking at, out of all the position of the food servers, there's people with and without disabilities in that role. And where this gets complex, can't just go up asking everyone, do you have a disability? Do you have a disability? But it's building that knowledge of and awareness and helping people and employers understand what integration is and why it's so important. The last piece here for setting the foundation is this concept of zero exclusion or full inclusion. And this is a fundamental piece to employment first and inclusion across a variety of areas. And it's essential, it's absolutely critical, right, that we create these expectations that all people can work in the general workforce if they want to. Not everyone wants to, and that's fine. But we want to get to a place of, yeah, they can work. Now, do we need to necessarily have all the answers of what that's going to look like? We may not, depending on our role, but there's people and professionals out there who do this, and that is a lot of the work that they do. It's this idea that people, again, they have access to employment services, whether that's supported employment or other employment supports to help them across their employment journey. Because we know when we talk about employment, and you may or may not have this experience based on what that looks like for you, employment usually isn't starting at point A and ending at point B. There's a few flips, a few twirlies in there, going backwards, going forwards. Some of you may have a degree in something that's completely unrelated to what you're doing now. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Yeah, I got some connections there. But a lot of the people and a lot of folks have different degrees and they're in different fields that are completely different. Zero exclusion, no one's excluded because of their type or severity of their disability, their symptoms, their personal presentation, so on and so forth. And we'll talk about, or I'll try not to forget to mention on when we talk about exploring the intersections with employment and the impact, how if someone's personal presentation, maybe they look disheveled, or maybe there's someone experiencing homelessness at the time, or actively using their substance of choice, the positive impact that employment can have on that and that individual as well. Or 2 degrees, yeah, right? Or just people who have degree after, because the education part's exciting. Okay. Any questions or thoughts before I move on?
I have a quick question,
Yeah.
Brian. Long ago, a couple decades ago, I worked for a organization that had residential facilities for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities,
Mhm.
and they had both segregated work programs, like you were describing, like day programs, a equestrian facility where they helped take care of animals. There were also individuals that had jobs outside of that organization in the community. And it felt
Mhm.
like the primary difference looking back between those populations was based off of rights restrictions that existed in their state plans of care. And I'm just curious from your perspective, are those restrictions an appropriate thing to take into consideration when trying to find employment for individuals with disabilities or individuals that identify as disabled? Or do you
Mhm.
think that's a backdoor way to just continue those segregated programs, essentially?
That's a great question. I think it's both. And from my vantage point, or what I look at is, what are those right restrictions, or whatever restrictions, supervision, what have you? What do those actually mean when they look at employment? Because just because someone has a rights restriction does not mean they can't work. It might mean we might need to be a little creative, right? So for example, if someone is not allowed to be in the community for more than 1 hour without supervision for safety, okay, what does supervision mean? Is that for a specific person? Is that just being out in the community? If they have a job coach, can that job coach provide supervision, or the employer? Even with people with criminal backgrounds, and if it's based on their involvement with the criminal legal system, they can't be around a certain population. Okay, so maybe retail's out of it, or maybe working at a place like a school or a place that caters the kids might not be allowable for safety for on both sides of it. But can they work overnight? where there's no community coming in. Maybe there's a supervisor or someone who doesn't fall within those areas of those restrictions. Those are a big piece of it. And I think what we encourage or tell people to do is think about where's the creativity in what that supports may look like to support them versus just saying, you have a rights restriction, therefore you have to work in a segregated or a group, or this is your only option. How do we get people to break down and start to explore those opportunities? Because they may or may not be there, but we want to do a better job of exploring versus saying because of A, then this equals B. Okay. Great question. So let's talk about, in my limited time left, because it goes by way too fast, let's explore some of these intersections. If you're comfortable, either unmute, because you guys are a talkative group, just kidding, or use the chat box. You can reflect, you can share, what has work meant for you? Or what has that meant for your life? That's a broad question. So think about, has it given you access to do something? Does it let you do fun things? What is work meant for you? Does it allow you to support your family or those within your family? During COVID and the pandemic era, if you were an individual who had experiences of being laid off or furloughed, what did that look like? Anxiety, depression, other health concerns or issues. Release, personal fulfillment while being able to pay bills. Yeah, bills are fun. Those are exciting and everywhere. Nicole said, gives me purpose, finance, and Lynn, financial independence, being productive. Good. Paying the bills. From Gavin, contribute to the community. Kelly Matthews, work lets me support myself, my daughter, have meaningful interactions with others, keep mind sharp. Yeah. Confidence and connection from Kristen. Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, right. These are all things that we think about. Right. And it's, if you have a disability or identify as a person with a disability or not, these are the same across everyone. Right. If I were to ask someone, well, what does that look like? If I ask my friend Beth, I use Beth all the time. She gives me permission. Beth is a person with a disability. Beth's going to give me the same answers. Guarantee it. David said, I was unemployed for 5 months during 2010 during the recession. Job gave a sense of self-worth, which is unfortunate because we should have a sense of self-worth without employment. Yeah. Employment has a big, and we take employment out, then we might wow. Because sometimes there's people, when we talk about work is like anxiety, it's stress producing. It can, based on roles or wanting to get things done or being that contributor as well. Thank you, David, for sharing, and thank you everyone else for sharing as well. Financial independence, contributions to the community, intellectual, expanding social network. Anne Marie, the social network's a big one, right? Because we talk about all the time that social capital or the connections. Question I should have asked you all, which I didn't, you can think about is, how many of you have gotten a job based on someone you know in that field or someone you know at that employer who was like, hey, David, got an opportunity for you, or hey, this might be of interest because I know what you're going through, or I know that you're looking for something. It's all about the people we know, 9 times out of 10. When we think about employment,
Right.
right?
Add something really quick.
Absolutely, Robin.
And sorry, I'm on my iPad, so I can't type in the chat. But I just want to go off of what you all are talking about and how I feel that the notion of employment defines who we are, because it's really deep rooted in society, who is capable, who's not capable. And so when you're unemployed, it feels like you're at a loss, like there's not that sense of belonging or inclusion in society. And so I went 6 years without a job in my field because of a lack of understanding of my capabilities being a blind individual. And so I felt like I didn't have that sense of purpose in terms of who I was as a 20-something-year-old.
Yeah. And Robin, thank you for contributing and sharing as well. Yeah, absolutely. We all meet someone new, right? Whether we're out in the community, whatever event. Hey, my name's Brian. Hey, Robin, what do you do for work? That's usually how those conversations go, right? And then as Robert, you could be, well, now how do I feel as a person if I'm not working, and what's that perception going to be from the person that I'm talking with? Or maybe I don't have a really fancy, air quote, fancy job, as was mentioned in the chat box earlier, based on those perceptions. Okay. So when we enhance social roles, and what we mean by that is we can and perfect segue, Robin, we can transform those perceptions from what John Armstrong says, from devalued to valued. And we do that by enhancing those social roles. And two ways we can enhance social roles is by enhancing the knowledge, right? Building that knowledge of that individual, right? Of their skills, contributions, their confidence, their self-worth, of what they can contribute to a business, but also society's side, right? When we walk in to a business or we interact with someone who has a visible disability, and we see that, wow, look at this person contributing. Wow, look at their knowledge. They were helpful. Or look at all the things that they were doing. I had no idea. Because the more competent one is, right, with those roles, their ability, enhancing knowledge is on each side of that scale, more roles become available to that person. And that experience and that exposure builds capacity, which then builds that competency. Because if I say cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or autism or blind or deaf or hard of hearing, you're all going to think of the first person you know who might identify with either or any of those. You might think of multiple people, and those two individuals are going to be very different as well. So enhancing that social image to the eyes of others, that perception, the images that surround a person or a group, create those strong expectations and messages about that. Employment is that avenue, or is a avenue, on how we can build that exposure and enhance that perception and that competency. And I'm going to do that through a photo here. We look on the right, there's a photo of an individual. It's not a stock photo, they are a real person. He is on the left doing his job, which involves folding pizza boxes and a lot of other things at the restaurant. Person on the right's a supervisor, and we can see them, the individual holding the boxes, looking at his supervisor, and she's looking at him as well, and they're both smiling and laughing with each other. Again, the more experiences, the more exposures, access to employment, talking about work, and those access to those opportunities, living the everyday life like anyone else, the more that person's going to grow and explore those roles in their life, including employment. When we have that integration with people with disabilities, they can experience that full inclusion, that deeper level to authentic belonging and building those meaningful relationships. And when they're visible in the workplace, in the public, not just working in the back or working overnight or hours when there's not people for them to interface with, it allows society to see those strengths and their valuable contributions. What they are bringing and contributing to that workforce and to that business. And you all mentioned too, allows me to contribute financially, allows me to contribute to the community. Same for people with disabilities. It has that positive impact on economic stability, social life, making friends, doing fun things with colleagues after work, interacting during breaks, enhances mental health. And it also, research has shows us, it also reducing substance use for people who are actively using a substance. They could be actively using and they're interested in work, and we do work activities of looking, exploring jobs. That substance use often goes down, and then they, in most cases, people go into recovery and long-term recovery. All right, I have 5 minutes. I'm going to use it all, so I'll be quick. David, and cut me off as you need to. When we talk about employment on health, we have these things called the social determinants of health. And this is an arch diagram, and it has the five bubbles that talk about each of these determinants of health. Education, access and quality, healthcare and quality, neighborhood and environment, social and community context, and economic stability. When we talk about health, right, and we think about each of these, right, education access includes early childhood development, education, enrollment in higher education, graduating from high school, graduating from colleges, universities, trade schools, 2-year programs, and so on. Healthcare, right? Health services, benefits, primary care, the ability to take days off and go do fun things, to take sick leave, to take care of yourself or others. Neighborhood as well, access to foods that support a healthy dietary patterns, crime and violence, environmental conditions, quality of housing. And looking at those civic, contexts includes civic participation, discrimination, incarceration, criminal legal system involvement as well. Employment can be connected to each of these. And it's not only about access, but it's about the quality of that access. That's super important as well. What we know with employment, people have greater health equity. Research has shown it can reduce healthcare costs for people with disabilities because of access to benefits such as health insurance, paid sick leave, parental leave. Momani et al. In 2012 found out through their research that Medicaid healthcare costs were reduced by $161 per member per month when they were engaged in an employment support program. So simply by either working and pursuing work, people's health started to go up. They started to feel better. They were visiting the doctor list, maybe getting off or using less prescriptions. And then periods of economic recession are possibly associated with higher prevalence of mental health and substance use disorders, as well as other physical concerns by Freschillo et al. As well. And the Administration for Mental Health and Substance Use Association found that employment's a protective factor against these. So meaning that if a person's working, they're less likely to experience a negative outcome, or it might not be as severe because employment's kind of protecting against some of those stress factors or stressful events as well. With this too, and my closing points here, part of this is self-determination, right? The ability for a person to know and believe in themselves. And we heard that from Robin's comment as well, toward achieving that goal. And self-determination is the ability to know and believe in yourself, and when we do this and take that deep dive and know we have supports, or people are going to say, all right, I'm going to go with you versus telling you no, or no that you shouldn't, it helps give people positive results in areas of employment, education, community living, improving that overall quality of life and how that's defined. It drives that employment journey. It's about that individual, because what they want to do in the direction they want to work is going to yield much better long-term results versus me saying, well, you should do this. Because frankly, if they could care less about what I think their skills are based off an assessment or an evaluation or report, it's not going to yield the same results. Okay? And this focuses on that individual making their decisions and making that own direction. And there's ways to do that, right? People say, well, what if they're not their own guardian? Guardianship is very complex, and there's different levels where that individual can still make decisions and drive that process, even if they aren't their own guardian. And for my wrap up, these are my final thoughts that I hope you take away and think about as well. Intersection.
Just real quick, Brian. We understand if anyone needs to leave. Thank you for attending. We'll keep recording to let Brian finish up. If you do need to leave, go ahead and just drop a quick thank you and show your appreciation to Brian in the chat.
Cool. Thank you, David. I promise I'll be quick. Intersectionality is a framework, and it helps us understand which is individualized for each person based on their identities, intersections, and experiences. Employment's a key piece, is a key intersectional piece that can contribute to enhancing of social roles of inclusion, integration, which then can lead to providing those opportunities for health promotion, prevention, and overall quality of life. And doing this through enhancing individually for them building knowledge and skills, and then the community for seeing those knowledge and those skills and those contributions. So my diagram at the bottom is an arrow going from left to right with inclusion and integration on the left, enhanced social roles in the middle with quality of life on the right towards the end of the arrow. So if you have questions or thoughts, you can always let me know. I can put my email in the chat box. If you need any resources for anything around employment, guardianship, or have questions, feel free to reach out at any time and let me know. David did put a couple of survey responses for you all in the chat box, both the pre and post learning session. I have those here as well. I kind of put them in a bad spot, so I apologize for that. If you need anything, please let me know. Here's my contact information. And thank you all for joining. And I hope you took something away or had you think a little differently and had a good time. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you again, Brian. You're getting lots of love and appreciation in the chat box. Once again, appreciate you being with us today and sharing your knowledge. To everyone else who was able to attend today, this concludes our last session for Wednesday the 16th. We do have additional sessions scheduled for Thursday and Friday. Registration is still open, so we encourage you to take another look at the website and see if there are any other sessions you may have interest in joining or might be speaking to you and where you're coming from. We appreciate all of you participating in the symposium this year. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David.